Tonight we reach the tragic climax of a long 6 weeks walking with Jesus in the last 24 hours of his life. We walked with him through the Last Supper on Thursday evening, beginning around 7 p.m., and to the Garden of Gethsemane, where he prayed, "Not my will, but yours." And then when he was carried off in the middle of the night to Caiaphas' house, where he was tried by the holiest of men, accused, and hung all night in the pit. Just after daylight, on Friday morning, he was taken back to the Kidron Valley, through that valley to Jerusalem, to stand before Pilate, who could have let him go, but instead washed his hands of all of it. And then, being subjected to the crowd, he sent Jesus to be flogged, to be tormented and tortured, to be humiliated. Senseless, horrid, in front of 600 Roman soldiers. And what did Jesus do? With dignity and in silence, he endured the pain, not counting the cost, and he gave himself up so that we would be free. And sometime after 8:30, before 9 in the morning, that Friday morning, this Friday morning, he was marched to Golgotha, where he would be crucified. And so the account of this story is to come to an end. And those of us who have been attentive these 6 weeks have been given a gift. The gift of walking with Jesus over a 24-hour period before his death. The gift of experiencing what he experienced visually in our minds. The gift of hearing what people had to say to Jesus, and maybe the most important gift of all, knowing how Jesus responded. And so again, this evening, we experienced Jesus' crucifixion and the last words that he spoke on the cross. I want you to think about what that means to you. How, after this night, will what you hear this evening inform your life from this point forward? I want to make sure that you understand about Roman crucifixion. It was not meant to be an expedient death. In fact, the key was to have the person suffer in agony as long as possible. The place was at a busy intersection outside the city walls. The idea was to look upon the one on the cross and think and maybe even say to yourself, I will never ever do what that person has done because I never want that to happen to me. Over hundreds of years, the Romans perfected the ability to keep a person alive on the cross for hours, at times days. Human beings at our worst. When going to be crucified, Jesus and the two criminals had to carry their own crosses. Imagine having to carry the very thing that you were going to be nailed to. John's gospel tells us that Jesus carried the cross all the way to Golgotha. Matthew, Mark, and Luke tell us that Simon carried it part of the way. Simon, a Jew from Libya, coming to Jerusalem for Passover. So which was it, Jesus or Simon? The truth is that it was likely both. Remember, just before Jesus was forced to carry his cross, he had been flogged so much so that his skin curled and his bone was exposed. He was exhausted. Exhausted. The total cross weighed about 300 pounds. And though artists depict that Jesus carries the whole cross to Golgotha, to Calvary, the reality is that he only carries the cross beam, which weighed about 100 pounds. The distance was about a third of the mile from where I'm standing right now, right down to River's Edge. Doesn't seem far for a strong man to be able to carry 100 pounds, but remember that he's been up all night. He has been tortured and humiliated. He's exhausted. Jesus carried the cross as far as he could, and then it was picked up by Simon. More about the cross, that vertical part of the cross would have already been at the site. It would have been laid down, and Jesus laid flat on it. The nails would have carefully been driven not into the hands, but into the wrists. And these Roman guards, the ones who did the nailing, they had precision because they knew exactly how to miss the artery, but maybe pick up a nerve along the way. Can you imagine the pain that shot through the victim's body? The most painful death invented. When the hands were placed, the nails were then put into the feet. We see portraits where the feet are like this, and the nail comes in on top. In 1968, there was a box that was a sacred box found in an archaeological dig outside of Jerusalem. And there was the skeleton of a foot, and the most amazing thing, the nail was actually in the top part of the foot, which helped scholars and archaeologists understand that the feet were straddled around the cross instead of placed and nailed in front. The cross was raised and dumped into the hole with Jesus on it, and then gravity took over. Here's what happens to a victim on the cross. First, the pain becomes almost unbearable, that the wrists, as the body sinks down, are strained and in pain. A person could breathe in with their hands up and their body sunk, but they had trouble breathing out, so they had to push themselves up to let the breath out. So for hours, can you imagine? Down to breathe in, up to breathe out, down to breathe in, up to breathe out. And if that wasn't enough, can you imagine the blood that Jesus had already lost? And because he couldn't get a good breath, the oxygen couldn't even make it well to the heart. So eventually congestive heart failure would set in. Breathing, oxygen, the heart. It was a combination of these three that caused the death. Oh, but it was slow. Imagine hanging 6 hours with your hands outstretched. Imagine Jesus in these hours.
It was on the Friday that they ended it all. Of course, they didn't do it one by one. They weren't brave enough. All the stones at the one time or no stones thrown at all. They did it in crowds where you can feel safe and lose yourself, and shout things you would never shout on your own, and do things you would never do if you felt the camera was watching you. It was a crowd in the church that did it. It was a crowd in the civil service that did it, and a crowd in the street that did it, and a crowd on the hill that did it. And he said nothing. He took the insults, the bruises, the spit on the face, the thongs on the back, the curses in the ears. He took the sigh of his friends turning away, running away. And he said nothing. He let them do their worst until their worst was done. As on Friday, they ended it all, and would have finished themselves had he not cried, "Father, forgive them."
Father, forgive them. We always think of the cross as being 15 to 20 feet up, but really it was just about 6 feet off the ground. Jesus could hear and see his mother weeping, the guards taunting, the crowd staring. Jesus could look right in their eyes. All those people could hear him speaking his last 7 phrases. Between the 4 Gospels, we have them all. In Luke, we read that Jesus looked upon them, the thieves, the chief priests, the passers-by, and said, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." Wouldn't you think that after all he'd gone through, he'd be wrathful? Isn't that how God is often seen, angry and vengeful? But wait, in this moment, Jesus sounds so compassionate. If God was so wrathful, how could he speak with such love? Forgive them, his first words.
I invite you to join in singing Jesus as he was crucified. Jesus as he was crucified.
"Woman, here is your son." We read that at the foot of the cross, where John and Mary, Jesus' mother, Mary is weeping. And Jesus says, "Woman, here now is your son. And here is your mother." Despite his pain, Jesus is concerned for his mother.
Sometimes I feel like a motherless child. Sometimes I feel like a motherless child. Sometimes I feel like a motherless child. A long way from home, a long ways from home, a long way from home, a long ways from home. Sometimes I feel like I'm almost gone. Sometimes I feel like I'm almost gone. Sometimes I feel like I'm almost gone. A long ways from home, a long ways from home, a long ways from home, a long way from home.
My God, why have you forsaken me? In Matthew and Mark, Jesus prays, my God, why have you forsaken me? Don't these words disturb you? Could they be comforting? It causes me to think that God, when he walked in the flesh on this earth, he knew what it was like to feel complete despair. God the Son felt that the Father was nowhere to be found. He was not listening. He was not helping. He had disappeared from his life. And every single one of us will, sometime in our life, walk through the same thing. Yet, we can be confident that Jesus knows what's happening in us. He understands what it was like to feel this way. He knew in his head that God had not abandoned him, but in his heart, this is how he felt: very, very alone.
We are afraid, God, come be our peace. We are afraid, God, come be our peace. Our tide of hope is ebbing while the waves of fear increase. We are afraid, God, come be our peace.
We are ashamed, God, come be our grace. We are ashamed, God, come be our grace. We scorn your arms of mercy while we run to sin's embrace. We are ashamed, God, come be our grace.
We are misled, God, come be our way. We are misled, God, come be our way. The truth has lost its power while destructive lies hold sway. We are misled, God, come be our way. We are alone, God, come be our friend. We are alone, God, come be our friend. The hopeful days grow shorter while our lonely nights extend. We are alone, God, come be our friend.
I thirst. What happens next is in all the Gospels. By now, Jesus was dehydrated. He cries out simply, I thirst. When someone is dying over time, they get thirsty. Just a bit of water makes the difference. Jesus said, I thirst. And someone picked up a hyssop branch and attached a sponge to it and dipped it into wine vinegar and put it to his lips. This was an act of compassion, except in John, it's more. Nearly all of John's writings are a double meaning. What is obvious and what is deeper? Remember when Jesus was with the Samaritan woman at the well? When she drew the water, he said he was the living water. And now on the cross, the source of the water was drying up. Hyssop was a small bush that smelled like lavender. In Egypt, when Pharaoh refused to free the Hebrews, God sent the final plague through the land, which is to kill the firstborn. Moses told the Hebrews to slaughter the lamb and take hyssop, dip it into the blood, and put it on your doorstops, so that you would be saved from death. Jesus the blood of the Lamb of God came to set us free from death.
I invite you to sing 2 stanzas of Jesus, Keep Me Near the Cross.
Today you will be with me in paradise. Luke's gospel tells us of the thieves. One is jeering at Jesus, but the other, he's thinking and listening to Jesus and his words, and to the others who are shouting and screaming at Jesus. He shouts out, "Do you not fear God?" And then we understand this thief to say these timeless words. Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom. And Jesus' response, truly, I tell you today, you will be with me in paradise. Remember me? What do you think of that thief? He didn't know anything about the church or the Trinity or atonement. He may not have even known the Ten Commandments or John 3:16. Do you think he was schooled enough, good enough to go to heaven? We Christians are the worst sometimes, aren't we? We can easily spot who rates and who doesn't with Jesus. Tell that to the thief on the cross. Tell that to Jesus, who turned to a man who didn't even understand any of those things and said, "You will be the first with me in paradise." Just because the thief said, "Remember me." Oh, doctrine is surely important, of course, but what saves and redeems us is Christ's grace and our faith. Simply turning to God, even if we don't have it all figured out. He is ready to welcome us.
I invite you to sing, Jesus, Remember Me.
Into thy hands I commend my spirit. It's near the end now. In Luke, we hear Jesus say, into thy hands I commend my spirit. It's a breath prayer. This is a great prayer to memorize and say every day. Jesus wondered if God had abandoned him. Nevertheless, he prayed these words, into your hands, God, I give myself to you. I trust myself to you. What would happen if every morning you woke up and said, Lord, into your hands I commend my spirit? What if you said it at night or on your mountaintop experience or when it feels like you are walking in hell on earth? Lord, into your hands I commend my spirit. Try it.
Into your
It is finished. And finally, Jesus shouts, it is finished. Not, I'm done. Know what Jesus means? It is completed. This is not a cry of defeat. This is a shout of victory. I came to do what I said I would do. It is finished. And what did he come to do? He came to save us. Save us from whatever we need to be saved from. And when we think about it, the last 24 hours was really to show us that there is something really dark, something wrong with humanity. And this something terribly wrong gives us the right to put others on a cross and allows onlookers of the ground to taunt and mock without compassion. And this darkness is what keeps us separated from God. Remember, that's atonement. Atonement. That Jesus came at God's initiative to draw us back to him, because it seems that we tend to cling to that which separates us from God. And here's the thing. God is not content to have us separated from him. Instead, God comes to us to save us from ourselves and sin and desperateness and despair and darkness. Jesus came to save us from these things. The cross is medicine for our soul. It helps us heal, and the bridge by which we are reconciled to God. Jesus offers himself for our very life. The cross, the suffering, and the dying is how God shows us the price he is willing to pay to save us and to redeem us. The costliness of his grace, that exquisite gift. Jesus said, no one has greater love than when he lays himself down for a friend. And Paul said, God proved his love for us while we were still sinners. Your life is worth saving. He gave himself for you. What will your response be?
I invite you to join in singing two stanzas of When I Survey the Wondrous Cross.